Good afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Mathew Klickstein, who will talk about his book, See You at San Diego, An Oral History of Comic-Con, Fandom, and the Triumph of Geek Culture. I'm so excited for this conversation. By the way, I'm Phoenix Alexander. I'm the Klein Librarian of Science Fiction at UC Riverside, where we have one of the largest collections of science fiction, fantasy, and horror in the world. And it's a delight to invite Mathew to speak to us all today. Mathew Klickstein is a multi-platform storyteller who consistently works in the formats of reportage, non-fiction books and novels, ghostwriting, filmmaking, episodical television, live theatre, public speaking, comic book creation, audiobook originals, and podcasting. Mathew has done all the things and is an expert in the fields that we're passionate about. So Mathew, I'll turn it over to you if you want to say a few words of introduction. And I know you have something, an important announcement to make.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. Thank you to UCR for having me and for all the people that are watching this whenever they see it. I do want to say, honestly, we were just talking about this, but the whole reason this is happening is I was connected originally through UC Riverside, which was generous enough to allow us to use a couple pictures in our book, See You at San Diego, that are just gorgeous. But I was originally connected to the folks there, and that led to this over the last like almost 2 years, is Astrid Anderson and Greg Bear. Both just amazing people in the world of fandom. And as some people probably already know, and those who don't should, Greg passed away this weekend. And we just did an event with Astrid, his wife, 2 weekends ago in Seattle, Fantagraphics Bookstore, the publisher, for the book. Greg was actually going to be there, but he was already hospitalized. He had actually signed book plates so that they can be there so that he could still sign books from away, which says a lot about his enthusiasm for his fans and for books like what we did and for stories, because as we'll get into, it's not my story, it's not my tale, it's not my chronicle, it's people like Greg Bear and his wife Astrid Anderson and others, and it's their stories that are told. And I'm so glad that we were able to involve Greg and Astrid in our project. And just wanted to say, especially if you're a science fiction fan, to check out Greg's work. He was one of the co-founders of Comic-Con, and he became just a wildly successful science fiction author who's been working right up until the end here. So he is somebody we want to remember, and just wanted to say that about Greg Bear.
Thank you very much for that. And I've only been in my post since August 1st, and I'm very sad that I never got to actually meet him in person. So it's a huge loss for the community for sure.
Smart guy, really good writer, and a really good person. I spoke to almost 100 people about the story of all of this, and everyone knew Greg, and no one had anything even remotely negative to say. He's one of the few people that was true of, and that was my experience with him and Astrid as well. They're just truly great, very compassionate, very generous, very smart, fun people. So,
oh, that's great to hear, and that's sort of I guess what we should all aspire to, right? When we pass, that if people are saying good things about us and not negative ones, that's wonderful. So let's talk about the book, which is a huge, multifaceted, multivocal, beautiful artifact. I tried to hold it up to the Zoom camera, but I wonder if the blurry background will do me in. No, okay, we're getting there. It's
really interesting like that.
Yeah, the graphic design is wonderful. It's almost set out like little film scripts. So talk to me about the genesis of the book, because I know this isn't your first time at the rodeo in terms of these sort of long-ranging histories. For instance, your book Slimed in 2013 was the oral history of Nickelodeon's golden age. How do you go about sort of conceptualizing a book like this, and then before even starting the research?
Yeah, and I do want to just quickly say, because I promised him that I would always name him and name drop him and spell his last name. Our design that everyone keeps bringing up, it itself has been reviewed a couple times now, was done by our just genius artist on that, Jonathan Barley, Barli. And Jonathan's an amazing person. It was so much fun collaborating with him on this project. And the design itself of the book is something we're particularly proud of. We wanted it to be immersive and really have a kineticism that I think that came to it. And that was largely thanks to Jonathan and his ability to do that. So Jonathan Barley's the person for that. As far as the projects that I work on, really, it's that which I'm passionate about. I, at a very young age, was very interested in autobiographies and biographies. Fourth, fifth, sixth grade, it wasn't enough for me to just watch Looney Tunes. I read Chuck Amok as a very young person. I would read a lot of books like that. Books about Universal monster movies from the 30s to the 50s and that kind of thing, again, at a very young age. I love black and white. I love Nick at Night and things like that. And so it was just something that was always a part of my life. As I grew older and started, writing for screenplays and short stories and doing journalism work, I realized I gravitated very much to writing about and talking a lot about my pop culture nostalgia stories, and just found ways of doing that on a larger and larger basis. And I kind of lucked out timing wise, a lot of it with the Nickelodeon book. It was really a perfect timing. The MTV book had just come out, and it was a perfect timing where our generation who grew up on the Nickelodeon's golden age was starting to become editors and things like that at newspapers and at publishers. And so there was enough where there hadn't really been a big history of it yet. But people in our position of getting some power at things like publishers and magazines and online sites especially were able to say, oh, let's start telling stories about Nickelodeon. And so that just worked out for me. And then, it's just something I've always enjoyed doing, especially interviews. And I like to tell the stories of other people, whether it was the Nickelodeon story or this new one, See You at San Diego, or even the Simpsons book that I did with one person, Mike Reese, from The Simpsons. But I interviewed Dan Castellaneta, I interviewed Conan O'Brien, we had Judd Apatow in there from the forward talking about some things. So I still like to bring in different voices, even in some of those other smaller projects that I've done, where I'm just talking to one person or in ghostwriting someone's memoir. I always try to work in interviews, get the fuller three-dimensional story. Is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's something that's striking when you're reading this book. Sort of your own presence or voice as an interviewer is somewhat almost completely invisible in some sense. So this sounds like obviously a deliberate move on your part, right, to sort of amplify the voices. Would you say that sort of happens during the process of interviewing, or is it something that you then sort of take yourself out, in the actual writing of the book?
I'm very much inspired by people like Studs Terkel. I really love Stud's work. I even love the simplicity of a lot of his titles, Working, Hard Times, so forth. And it's like field recordings, like what Alan Lomax used to do with blues and jazz music and that kind of thing. There's something about it's very anthropological in a way that I very much appreciate. And I've always loved those kinds of books and thought, what if we did it that way, where it's not my analysis, it's not my speculation, because really, who am I? Especially so many of the events in this book happened before I was even born. I want to go to the raw source of the people who are really there, and also acknowledge the fact that there's going to be a lot of contradiction, and a lot of people are going to remember things differently, and a lot of people are not going to agree on things that happen, especially when there wasn't really a record being taken.
Right.
A lot of why I like to also focus, whether it's Nickelodeon or this or The Simpsons or some of my other projects, I tend to focus on the origin, the provenance of these things, because that's back when nobody was taking pictures, nobody was writing anything down, like nobody, it's like I literally wrote the book on Nickelodeon, and there would be probably 5 different people who would say who created Nickelodeon. Still to this day. And you know what? You read the MTV book, which is huge. They say the exact same thing. It's like, who really created MTV? That's how much there was like not records taken really of so many different things, even juggernauts like that. But that chaos, that kind of craziness is fun to bring to life through the memories of maybe 15 or 10 or 5 different people at a time. And I think that's when the book really comes to life, is when there's a lot of people sounding off, almost like a Robert Altman movie or something like that. I love that. Incidentally, I'm a big Robert Altman fan, so that probably has a lot to do with it too. It's like always watching Nashville or something.
Right. No, that's so great to hear. And I guess it sort of answers my next question, because the book, so for readers approaching the book, it's sort of organized in almost like a movie treatment, I guess, or like the characters, the plot, the conflict, the setting, I'm forgetting one, as opposed to sort of like, this is, in 1970, the first Comic Con, took place, blah, blah, blah. So it's not, it sort of launches you straight into this conversation between these folks who are involved. And you do kind of get the sense that of that chaos and that collaborative effort, right? With, I think at one point it's described as Shell Dorf, like an aging late 30s something, being, grabbing all these kids and basically forcing it, not forcing them, like convincing them to help found this convention. But I guess I guess I would ask, like, did that kind of, did you know the structure of the book before you started taking the interviews? You knew you wanted it to be, the characters, the plot,
Yeah, well, two things there. One is that's a lot of times how I organize my projects. My Nickelodeon book was similar to, there still is a beginning, middle, and end overall, but the chapters are broken up into themes and kind of ideas that sort of, it's almost like a deconstructed story of Nickelodeon that I'm putting back together again, that happens to, although there's a lot of digressions and flashbacks, if you will, and such, yes, I think in terms of film a lot, for obvious reasons, but it still tells the beginning, middle, and end. And I like that kind of storytelling a little bit better because it keeps it, again, more kinetic, more alive, and it really brings you into the story. You don't always know exactly where you're going, and I think that we can do that not just in books, but in nonfiction books. I think that we can have more fun with the structure and format of a nonfiction book like this, because that way we can educate and illuminate, especially a lot of parts of our history, our shared history that haven't really gotten a lot of spotlight, but also in a way that will be accessible to a lot of people. I think once people have an opportunity to sit down and read the book, they get really pulled into it for that reason. And I think that that's very good. It's quite literally the sugar helps the medicine go down. I've had a number of people who look at it and say, oh my God, it's so big, it's going to take me months to read. And then I hear from them 3 days later. People who are film producers and people who have 5 kids and whatever, busy people 3 days later, like, I finished it. Wow. And I go, yeah, you just sit down and it pulls you in. And that was very intentional. And I feel like I can also talk like this without sounding too arrogant, because it's really, again, not my storytelling. It's all I am as a collector. I'm just a curator. I'm more like an editor, really, more than anything else. Their stories, and surprise, surprise, I collected over 50 amazing storytellers. These are best-selling science fiction authors. These are people who helped create underground comics like Trina Robbins. These are people who are filmmakers. These are people who do television. I mean, Neil Gaiman, and Sergio Aragones. Like, all I did was stand back and let them do their thing, and then I threw it all together. And I'm like, here you go. It's a paella is what it is.
Right.
Like, that was I just threw it all together. It's their ingredients. And as you would imagine, their ingredients are really tasty.
Sure, but to toot your own horn a bit, your curation is excellent. Your editorial composition is spot on. And talking of Neil Gaiman, and I think part of the joy of reading a book like this is that I think you realize the pervasiveness of, like, geek culture, as you say in the cover. Whether you're a Star Wars fan, whether you're a Star Trek fan, whether you're a Tori Amos fan, like, these figures of the 20th century that in these stories you narrate, sort of, I think it shows how something so small and so chaotically founded has really taken over the world. Again, to use language from your title. My personal sort of sit up in my chair and gasp moment was page 237 when Neil Gaiman talks about how he met Tori Amos. Oh, he didn't meet her. He was given a cassette of what would become Little Earthquakes. Because I knew about their friendship, the Tori and Neil friendship, and then I was like, "That's how they met." It was Comic Con, and then Jill Thompson as well, who went on to
say, I tell that story a lot because that comes up, especially when we're discussing, which is really what the book's about, is the community that exists and where that came from and its evolution over the years. And Neil is one of the people who talks in a very elegiac way, surprise, about how he clearly still has a lot of love and respect for Comic-Con now. Misses those days where someone like he, even semi-celebrity or celebrity, in that time when the Jill Thompson, Tori Amos experience happened, you know, that was able to happen. And for those who haven't seen the book yet or know the story, very quickly, Neil Gaiman was given, in the span of 20 minutes, he says, and he makes that clear that it happened within 20 minutes, a cassette tape that ultimately had Tori Amos's breakthrough albums, like, you know, sessions or whatever you want to call it, on it. And that's how he originally was put in touch with Tori Amos, who's become a lifelong friend. And also some artwork that a friend gave him of Jill Thompson's, and he ended up working with her through that on Sandman and the like. And he waxes a little, you know, kind of reflective on how it's a shame that, you know, he can't really do that anymore, because, you know, there's always going to be all the security and too many people and all that. And a few people bring that up, and that's going to happen with anything like this. I'm sure, you know, everything from Coachella to Bonnaroo to Burning Man to, you know, anything else is going to not be what it was in the very beginning. You know, Sundance, Cannes, you know, whatever it is, it all has a similar kind of trajectory.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about that in terms of I guess the role of counterculture, right, in these community formations, because one of the things that comes out really strongly and poignantly in the book is that you know, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's this sort of cultural touchstone events that are shaping what then is happening with Comic-Con, right? And it struck me how many East Coast folks, you know, moved to the West Coast and then sort of brought about this you know, event in a sleepy town, you know, sleepy city, San Diego, which hadn't seen this kind of thing before, right? And that strong SoCal, North
hadn't seen much of anything before.
Right.
It was started. A lot of the story is about how San Diego itself first really kind of blossomed in those early years, way back in the early 50s. I mean, it was still a little bit of nothing. One of the pictures has a guy wearing the naval hat, because it was still a lot of just naval officers. Many Comic-Con kids who ended up creating Comic-Con had moved from places elsewhere because their dads or parents were somehow involved in the aerospace industry, involved in the base or something along those lines. Yeah, and so that's a lot of what brought people in. And then as San Diego grew, so too did the con. And at a point, it could be said there was definitely a parallel that was very direct and explicit, for sure.
Yeah. So and something that's interesting at the sort of end of the book, and not to, I mean, it's difficult to spoil a book like this, but I guess just to sort of,
I think we all know what the spoiler is.
I mean, we know what the spoiler is, but
like, oh, Titanic. Yeah.
Well, just to sort of touch upon that elegiac tone where who says it? Somebody, where are my notes? Somebody describes Comic-Con at the end as like 100 different parties happening at once, right? Because there is the idea that, you know, the minute, I mean, there's so much to talk about in terms of Hollywood and the sort of this commercial sensibility that emerged in the 90s, which is sort of what emerges from these conversations of you have franchises and marketing sort of kick into high gear. But I guess to ask a question that I was planning on ending with, what are the kinds of ways of community building now where, as is mentioned, geek culture has won, right? It's mainstreams, you know, science fiction and fantasy narratives are proliferating in media of all kinds. What's next, I guess, for fandom? You know, what does it look like? How would somebody recreate those, you know, a small group of kids in a quiet city in you know, in the late 60s, you know?
Well, I'd have two answers for that. One is it's happening right now. We don't know. We don't see it. Always the most potent and powerful one that's going to come out. And that is also part of this story. Look at something like Punk with CBGB. I mean, I was just talking with a friend about this the other day. If anyone's ever, and now it's gone, it's literally gone. But I remember being able to go there right before it was gone. And the first thing I thought was how incredibly small it was. It was it's a closet. I think a lot. Like, I walked in and it wasn't like, oh my God, this is where Punk came from. It was like, how did they get, like, you couldn't fit more than 15 people in here. This is the closet. This is like the size of a bathroom. Like, that was my first thought. And yet at the end of the day, look at what that has spawned, or something like Grand Ole Opry for country music, or you know, Queens and Brooklyn for hip hop, and, you know, all these kinds of things like that. Austin, that's come out of there. And so, you know, when we're talking about something like Comic-Con and geek culture, I think we got to consider that as history tells us, we don't know about it yet. We'll know about it when it first starts to come up. And I guarantee you, as always, you know, the revolution will not be televised. This is not going to, I bet you it's not going to come off of TikTok. I bet you it'll be something else and come from, let's hope. I mean, let's hope that that's still possible and out there, because that's a lot of what happens. The other thing that I'll say really quickly is, and you know, this is also a big theme of the book, almost more of a spoiler and more of a thematic way of, you know, what's the future of geek and culture?
Yeah.
You know, I think that if you read Animal Farm or other books like that, that kind of are foretelling what happens during revolutions, be it the Russian revolutions or French Revolution or so many others, where it kind of goes to another place. You know, I just read for the first time The Death of Stalin, the graphic novel that the movie's based on, and I mean, you know, there is something to be said that geek culture has gotten either too big or it's gotten so absorbed by the mainstream and corporate that and the other, that it's not quite what it once was. I remember those questions were coming up even when the Big Bang Theory was getting really big.
Right.
For quote unquote geek representation and all this, and now people are going to know what Free Comic Book Day is, and people are going to know about Comic-Con more because they bring it up and all this. But also there were others who were like, that's not what geeks look like, or they're making fun of us, or this, that, and the other. And so, you know, it's those questions are being asked a lot right now, and that's a lot of what's in the book, including from a lot of the older folks who really created this, people like Paul Salmon, who literally wrote the book on Blade Runner and has done so much else. He's a big part of this story as well. He's one of the people, for good or ill, who brought Hollywood down in the late 70s to Comic-Con and really kind of forged that relationship between the fans and Hollywood. I mean, he, Jeff Walker, and Charlie Lippincott, and a couple of others really were those emissaries for the studios, especially people like George Lucas and some of those guys that were starting to realize, hey, we have an untapped kind of free market down here that we can utilize to like decide, you know what's going to be happening next and that kind of thing. And that and Paul, you know, was one of those people. He also talks a lot in the book, though, especially toward the end, about how geek culture and corporate world and how those are working out right now, and maybe they're not. That's a question that we're all having to ask right now. And so what does it even mean anymore to be a geek is almost the question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah, and thinking about the way in which folks speak about the early days, at least, you know, there was such a sense of community and not abrasive. You know, I think it's said in the book that the early days of Comic-Con had a pretty diverse group of fans and folks involved with it. And there's a quote I want to come back to because I found it really interesting. Who says this? Something about there were no women in fandom until the 60s. Oh yeah, no women in SF until the 1960s in Star Trek. And I want to come back to that because I found that really interesting.
SF being science fiction, of course, for those who might
know. Yes, sorry, science fiction. But my question about sort of the I guess the nature of those relationships, because, you know, science fiction, at least in print, doesn't always have has often had a quite combative, I guess, tone, with, you know, writers writing into editors, and, you know, whole careers are being launched on folks being annoyed at what's being published. So the famous one, like Damon Knight writing in and, you know, hating on, you know, the world of Null A, and then being inspired to write science fiction because he was really hated this book so much. Did you see a sort of tension between sort of the in-person community fandom events that led to something like Comic-Con and more the sort of the written side of things, or like the published world of science fiction and comics? How did that play out as you sort of were mediating all these voices?
Wow, well, there's kind of two and a half different questions in there.
Snuck them in
all at the same time. Yeah. I will say that Comic-Con seems to have been a place that brought together this community of people. from many different backgrounds and from many different places. It's now today called Comic-Con International, and there's a lot of discussion in the book about, because these people were not only storytellers, they were also story addicts. They loved story and information and art and expression. They very early on were bringing in people from not only all different kinds of communities in America, but all over the world. Very early on, they were bringing in people from many different continents. It's one of the first places, if not the first, where Western culture was really being introduced to manga and anime. Very early on, they were bringing in some of those creators, people coming up from Mexico, people coming out from all over Europe, of course, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, all over the place. I mean, they were bringing in people from all over. And they had people like Sergio Aragonés who could talk to almost everybody. There's stories in the book about how everyone loved traveling with Sergio because he knew every language and knew how to talk to everybody and all this kind of stuff. So they had that ability to do that and that foresight to do that. Look, Neil deGrasse Tyson just recently said in his memoir that the closest thing that he ever saw to utopia was Comic-Con.
Yeah.
I think that nice. Come through a lot. Trina Robbins is someone who does not hold back at all. It's one of the things she's known for. It's one of the reasons we love her so much. And I just read her memoir recently. It came out a couple of years ago. It's great. It's called Last Girl Standing. She doesn't mind naming names, and she doesn't mind fingers. And I've now done 2 different events with her, and we've talked about the fact that she's never had any kind of real negative experience she can remember being, a young female, especially, a young petite female in the community, in the scene, and very much the opposite. And Trina's somebody who would say, if she admits, that must happen. It probably does these days, unfortunately, but she said she's never had that. And a lot of the other people have said similar things, where it's just a true place for all different kinds of folks to come together and enjoy their passions. And a big part of that is storytelling and connecting with each other on that level. And all the rest of it almost doesn't even matter anymore. And I think that's something that's worth considering and knowing about, and why I take a lot of this so seriously, especially right now, when we're dealing with so many other things in our culture right now. I think this is not an escape or a diversion or a distraction. I think this is part of what's going on right now in our larger cultural questions, as an alternative perspective on how to think about how to connect with each other.
Right, definitely. And you really get that sense again from the book, with the women who are interviewed, that obviously, there are things to critique, but in general, I think the voices are very positive about the whole experience.
Worse than all. This is not, there's definitely lots of negative stories in the book as well, and in the story, as there is with any history.
Sure.
In fact, that's why we were, proudly, as a lot of projects like this are, proudly not, an authorized project.
Yes, yeah.
All of the people who actually created a Comic-Con and many of the bigger name folks who helped to make it grow. It's a different group now, and we didn't want this to be something that was authorized, because we wanted to let this be warts and all. And although ultimately it's definitely a celebration and a very intense months chronicle of all of this, it's it has its negative parts as well, which is an important part of the story that probably would have had to have been attenuated somewhat if we had made it, an official history.
Yeah, no, I find that really interesting in the acknowledgements too, sort of in the afterword, where you talk about the organization of the book. Because undoubtedly it's created by human beings. They, of course, they're going to rub each other the wrong way, and there's going to be some.
They're kids. These were kids.
And kids.
Some of them were young as 12 or 13. I mean, they were going in the 60s and 70s, when things were really crazy all around them.
I know.
Of course, mistakes were made. Yes.
Sure. But it's it's in some ways, I think it's sad that can't make it into an official authorized biography. But that's a
story.
That's a story. Well, talking of warts and all, and I don't know if and if you can't answer this, please just sort of say so. But I found it interesting that there's one chapter titled Conflict, which seems to be all about Sheldorf, right? And who, for folks who don't know, was one of the really founding figures of Comic-Con.
Some would say the founder. Most would say the founder.
The founder. Yeah, I was hesitant to say that because I know there was some.
I know that's part of it. Yeah, it's true. No one can say for sure, but most would say yes.
Right. But he moved from New York, I believe, right?
He moved
To
around quite a bit. Yeah, he
okay,
spent time in New York. He had spent time in Detroit with the triple fanfare right before
sure.
coming to San Diego. So he moved around a lot.
Right. But my question is, in this chapter, sort of, is mostly to do with him and folks having positive and negative things to say. I was just curious from your perspective. I guess he must have been a major enough figure. Such a major and not controversial is the wrong word, but
He was definitely
figure
controversial.
worthy of debate to have his own chapter. Like, could you say a bit more about how you figured about him in this story?
Yes, you're right, and this kind of goes back to answering an earlier question, or part of an earlier question. All of this came originally from a six-part audio documentary series we did with SiriusXM and Stitcher 2 years ago. Although we did it with SiriusXM and Stitcher, it is available free on all audio platforms. It's called Comic Con Begins. I highly recommend it. We had a lot of fun with it. It's all the recordings, or a lot of the recordings of the interviews that would become this book. And it also includes a lot of archival stuff from the very first Comic Con in 1970 and 75, and all of those kinds of things. But with that, I had basically the same kind of structure
Hmm.
as the book. So I'd already kind of laid away where everything would go. And frankly, we kind of had a feeling this would happen in advance, but Shell Dwarf did come up enough in
Hmm.
over 70 hours of interviews that we
Mm.
conducted that we realized that it was important to talk about him, because everybody did, and many for very long periods of time, as his own episode of the podcast series. And as such, I thought it was appropriate to have it be its own chapter in the book.
Hmm.
Part of that's also because Shell was already gone 2009, and I
Right.
didn't start this until a couple of years ago, and there would have been no way to talk to him. And honestly, there weren't very many interviews or anything out there,
Mm.
print or otherwise. I found one or two very short little things, and we utilized a little bit of it in the podcast series with permission from the radio station that did it and things like that. And I used a little bit of that in the book, but there really was not much on Shell out there, and
Hmm.
we wanted to talk about that. And you're right, very much Citizen Kane style, or whether it would be like a Stanley or a Steve Jobs or
Hmm.
Thomas Edison or so many other these people. We want it to be nuanced and let people really kind of have their say. And
Hmm.
I will say there's definitely people who did not like Shell and had a really
Sure.
bad experience with him. But even the most intensive haters, two in particular that I could think of,
Hmm.
admit and say Comic Con would not have happened without him. So even his most fervent detractors still
Hmm.
agree that Shell was the guy who really made it all happen.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
nothing else from his vision, even if it wasn't necessarily his work,
Hmm.
his labor into it, if you will.
Right.
So interesting guy, and it was enough to tell the story. And through talking about Shell almost as a case study of someone who was very involved in it, we were able to also kind of discuss more things about how just relationships were changing. And the book, like my Nickelodeon book and other projects I've done, is still very beginning, middle, and end overall.
Hmm.
And so when we're talking about how kind of Shell's story is evolving over time, we also talk about how the story of Comic Con's evolving as well as
Hmm.
culture. And you'll notice that intentionally kind of moves into the 80s when a lot of that started to happen.
Hmm.
And you had, and things were sort of changing. The Shell Dwarfs of the earlier years were kind of fading out,
Yeah.
and the Hollywood and such was starting to come in. That really starts picking up in the 90s.
Hmm.
But there's rumblings of it in the 80s, going
Hmm.
as far back as 83 when they
Hmm.
had the Ectomobile there. And for those counting, you'll remember Ghostbusters doesn't even come out till 84.
Hmm.
So, they were already, and a few people like Scott Shaw, an early co-founder of Comic Con, says that's when he felt Hollywood really first started showing itself, was
Hmm.
with the Ectomobile in 83. And so anyway.
No, that's amazing context, and it's it rings true. People are not the same. You would not be the same person in 1970s you were in 1980. And I think in the book it says something about Shell becoming like the climate of Southern California sort of getting to him, and he sort of chilled out a bit and
Yeah,
moved on to other projects. Which I mean, that's the whole
yeah.
thing I find fascinating. Um,
Yeah, no,
the
look, and
psychology of environment, I guess. Sorry.
that came up just the other night. I was doing a speaking agent like this for a library, and there was an older gentleman in the back who asked, and he put it into his answer. And this is out here in Ohio where I live these
Hmm.
days. he goes, why did it happen in San Diego? Did it have anything to do with the climate? And everyone kind of chuckled, and I went, yeah, actually that had a lot to do with it. And he kind of laughed and and I started talking about it. So yeah, climate and the climate psychology, as you say, absolutely. That, there were multiple reasons, but a number of people say, yes, the climate and the beaches and so forth. And even for people coming from New York, it wasn't quite as humid as it was out there, especially there was, air conditioners everywhere. So anyway, just had to throw that in there because
it's fascinating. It's fascinating. For folks interested, I've just dropped the link to the podcast series in the chat, so you can check that out. I guess changing tack a bit, going back to sort of thinking about comics in Comic-Con, I was really struck by the original logo that Shell designed had 3 rings inside the state of California, representing comics and comic art, science fiction, and film. Cut to the final chapter where I think it's Barry Short mentions more people are, in these exhibit halls, it's less about the creators, right, than about people selling stuff. I'm just curious, sort of your thoughts about the role of comics and graphic novels today in Comic-Con and the future of geek culture in general. Have they sort of been? Is it just a gateway to getting your feature film made, or are they still kind of forging their own path as an art form?
As with everything else, I think it's all things. I think it's all possible.
All the things.
Yeah, I mean, I really, again, I mean, and that might seem like lazy thinking, or I'm just eschewing the question, but I really feel that that's true, and I feel that that's why I wanted to focus on to tell the story of geek culture. Because to be clear, the book goes, as you know, all the way back well before Comic-Con ever started, at least into the 1930s. I mean, the first convention, and it's mentioned in there at all, that anybody would say would be the 1939, Worldcon in 1994. And there's discussions of that, and H.P. Lovecraft and H.G. Wells and this, that, and the other. So we go all the way back. I chose Comic-Con because it was sort of a good fulcrum to tell the story around the prehistory, history, and expansion, almost itself as a kind of case study, and all the people kind of were part of that organism, part of that world. If it were a coral, it would be like all the little people that would, the little fish and whatnot that keep it alive as an ecosystem.
Sure.
That's kind of what it is, and why I brought up like CBGB for punk and that kind of thing. So I think in telling more personal story, we're able to talk about this larger aspect of geek culture, and it's done through all these different voices. And I think that's what's going to stay, are all the different voices. And we don't even know what the next step is going to be. You're right, Comic-Con is huge now, and there's all this Hollywood, but as Barry Alfonso says, as part of that, there's hundreds of different things happening now that you talked about earlier. Barry Alfonso said just in the last few years before COVID, he and his wife went into a room and they were doing a read around of Little Lulu. And he goes, yeah, all the big celebrities in Hollywood and corporate this, that, and the others going on, but things like that are still happening.
Yeah.
So it's all of it all at once. As Kevin Smith says in the book, it's like walking into the internet. And there's some good to that, and there's some bad to that. It's a lot of the same good and bad. I think that's why we like to tell this story. Is it's more than just the institution; it's the community itself and how they kind of come to and gather and have grown and been helped to grow by this thing called Comic-Con, which Guinness Book of World Records twice in the last few years has referred to as the largest pop culture gathering worldwide. It's where the Eisners take place. There's so much that happens that's just intrinsically it's the start of the whole rest of the season. And in that way, it remains very much that way. Even when things have been going on more recently with COVID and the virtual events, it's wobbly. And we talk about that too. It was when I was interviewing everybody. So it goes all the way to, we don't leave that out. There's discussion that's going on during COVID in the book. We were doing the interviews right then, and people were talking about it in real time. Even people like your Kevin Smiths and others, like, what's the future of all this? So if you want to know, a lot of that's in the book as well. These people. So, and I think a lot of them end up being right about a lot of things, talking about kind of what would happen when COVID's over, or as it starts to be over.
Well, that sort of leads on to my could be one of my final questions before we open up to the audience. But being privy to all these stories, curating all these voices, what are some of the if you could give advice to a team today wanting to start a convention of their own, or what are sort of the kind of takeaways they could or inspirations, models that they could use? Is it really just, ring up your friends, borrow someone's car and drive down, start doing some artwork, like what's the kind of, how could that energy be replicated today? And could it be replicated today, I guess?
Yeah, I really don't know if it could be replicated today.
Mm,
It's really hard to say, and I'm not denigrating this era now, or this
mm,
society, or this next generation in any way. I've worked with them.
mhm,
I've also done devised theater projects with kids as young as 8, 9 years old in the last few years. I love working with children
mhm,
creatively and helping them to
mhm,
tell stories and whatnot. So I don't know if the the way of getting expression out there through our current means and platforms and media outlets is really
mm,
conducive to
mhm,
it happening in the same way that it did before, if by nothing
mm,
more, nothing else aside from we're so separated and isolated. I mean,
mm.
before there were only a few channels, there were only a few studios,
Right.
this and that, and
Yeah.
I'll just say that Aldous Huxley always said that George Orwell was wrong, that the future would not be censorship, the future would be super saturation of information. There'd be
Yeah.
too much going on, too much information. They wouldn't have to hide anything because there'd be so
Yeah.
much that we'd be
Yeah.
overstimulated.
Right.
If Aldous Huxley's work, aside from Brave New World, he wrote often about that very idea, even in things like Devil's Aladdin, and a
Hmm.
lot of his books are about, and his life was about analyzing how we're overstimulated by
Hmm.
a lot of media and such. And so
Hmm.
that's a lot of what this is about as well, is
Hmm.
is there too much now, and how are we consuming it? Where does it come from? That's a lot of why
Hmm.
I brought in a fan studies scholar, Dr. Aaron Hanna, and had
Hmm.
other kind of talking about that later on in the book, as far as the idea of things like conspicuous consumption. Look, I love this sweater. It's a lot of fun. I'm also advertising for Polaroid right now.
Right. Yeah.
Paying me, and so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that discussion going on
Yeah.
also, which again connects with our larger culture and whatnot. I
Hmm.
know I
Hmm.
digressed so much at this point that I don't even
No,
know
it's all part
the
of the
question,
conversation.
but
It's no, not at all. It's very interesting. For me, and again, this is absolutely no shade to Funko Pops, but Funko Pops have sort of become the emblem, right, of culture today. And they're so you can get a Funko Pop of like some extra, some very, very minor character in some, tiny
or
TV
even
show.
brands. I saw one for not just a Slurpee, but a 7-Eleven Slurpee. I saw that in a store, and I'm
Really?
starting to see more and more of those. It's like a Dunkin' Donuts donut. It's not just a donut, it's a
Really?
Dunkin' Donuts donut. It's a Starbucks cup, and it's Starbucks logo, not some knockoff brand.
Huh.
Yeah,
As a
so the
Funko Pop?
brands, what? Yes,
Wow.
yes. I've been
Wow.
traveling around a lot of comic book shops in the last couple of weeks on tour, and I can tell you, I see those, and people are buying them. People are
Wow.
definitely getting
Yeah.
the
Oh,
logo
yeah.
ones, and it's weird. It is, or mascots, I should say. They have arms and everything,
Yes.
but they are ultimately. I just
Yeah.
pointed one out to my wife the other night when we were in
Yeah.
the store, and again I said, like, and it says 7-Eleven on it, like it's not like a generic slushy.
No, no.
It says Slurpee from 7-Eleven. Yeah, so
And somebody's out there who wants to collect, it maybe already has collected every single Funko Pop ever in existence,
oh yeah, I'm
including
sure
the
it's public.
brand,
Well,
brand collaborations.
there's a really interesting documentary about Beanie Babies that came out about a year or two ago that I enjoyed, and I
Hmm.
hear the book was really good too.
Hmm.
One of the people in our book, Kasim Gaines, who
Hmm.
writes books like this as well, he just did the ET book, and he did the Back to
Hmm.
the book and some others.
Hmm.
He told me about when he was reading the book at one point, and was
Hmm.
kind of saying, like, it's sort of like the way that we write, and what we like to do with our books. But yeah, Beanie Babies. And I actually, and when I was in high school, through a family friend, I worked at a Hallmark store
Hmm.
right at the peak of Beanie Babies, and
Oh,
like it
wow.
was just, that was what my life was for about those 2 years or so that I worked after school and on the weekends and such, was just Beanie Baby craziness. That was
Damn.
really what it was. Yeah, I had to
Yeah.
learn a word, and I mean, like, we would just get boxes and boxes. We'd be like
Hmm.
drowning in them. It was like an 80s movie or something. Yeah.
Good
So
coming alive.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So this is what happens, like Pet Rock or whatever it is. You'll notice at the beginning of the book, even it starts with a quote from Alvin Toffler from
Hmm.
Future Shop, and it's not
Hmm.
someone said that that I say that book came out in 1970, which is the year that Comic-Con started, and he
Mm-hmm.
refers to it already as the nostalgia industry. Look, I just found a Cinefantastique, kind of like a sort of Fangoria type of magazine from 1982 at a record store the other day, and there's an advertisement in it talking about how like television and film and video games and all these different things are coming together to create $1 billion industry, and that Hollywood and media is catching on and stuff. I mean, it's saying all this in 1982 in I even sent it to some people and I'm like, if they only knew, like already realizing it in 82 that, hey, there is, a lot of money to be made here in an industry out of all of this stuff together as one thing: video games and tabletop games and science fiction, fantasy, etc. And they were already figuring it out at least as early as 1982.
Yeah, definitely. And I think going back to sort of no shade to that, like one of the great things about Comic-Con that comes out in the book is that people are really adamant. They were showing 2001 Space Odyssey and then Flash Gordon in the next room. There's sort of a collapse of high
Flash Gordon, the porn version,
and Flash Gordon. I was gonna, I was.
No high nor low.
No, it's true. It's true. Oh, Siri's getting involved. And it's sort of a really chaotic but wonderful space. It sounds like, and almost like the 7-Eleven Funko Pop is a chaotic and wonderful object of some kind of fandom, if you can call it that. But I'm sure you can call it that.
Sure, it does to some people.
Yeah,
we might find that very frightening and strange, but there are others who do not.
Of course.
I will tell you right now, I worked at the table of Scott Shaw, one of the co-founders, who's of course greatly spotlit throughout the story for a number of years. But I worked with him at the November Comic-Con that they did as sort of a special edition thing that they had to do for various reasons, still at the convention center, a smaller kind of Comic-Con light. And I told Scott I'd help him at his table, and while I was literally finishing the book, and it was great because all these different people came. Dave Stevens, the creator of Rocketeer's Sister, came, and all these different folks would come to talk to Scott. So it was a great vantage point to talk to people. But one person came and specifically wanted Scott's Funkos that had been made. Scott, among other things, had done all of the Fruity Pebbles and Cocoa Pebbles commercials.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Talking about logos and mascots and branding and all this stuff. That's one of Scott's claims to fame. Scott Shaw did all those, like all 250 of them.
Wow.
And there are Funkos of not just Fred and Barney, but Fred and Barney from those Cocoa and Pebbles, and Scott was selling them. This guy came and was all about them, talking about them, wanting them. It turned out he was either the founder or CEO of Funko. He came during the preview.
No way.
And he gave us his card, and I don't remember which one it was. It was either the CEO or founder. He didn't even know those Funkos exist, and we talked to him for a little while. Scott, of course, was like, hey, if you ever want me to do any work for you, give him his card and all that. But yeah, the guy who either runs or created Funko came to Scott's table to get a Funko of Scott's Fruity Pebbles and Cocoa Pebbles, Fred and Barney. I mean, that is
wild.
Boris, you know what I mean? That's feedback loop time, man.
That's self-generating or something. Wow.
Only kind of thing that can happen at Comic-Con, for sure.
Right. That's wild. We have 10 minutes left. I want to open the floor to questions. So does anybody on chat, on Zoom, have any questions for Matthew? I feel like I could chat to you for hours, Matthew, but I figured it might be best to get some.
If there's no one else on there, I'm happy to fill out the time to answer any other questions that you might have. That's fine too.
Oh, sure.
Or we can call it a day, whatever you want to do.
No. We'll go to the hour for sure. So yeah, any questions? Oh, here we go. We have one. What was the most surprising thing you discovered doing this?
That's changed a little bit from the beginning. I used to say I was most surprised that with one of the big critiques right now of Comic-Con is it's no longer just about comics. And I even fell for that trap well up until around before I started this. I certainly learned through the process that it's always been about movies and cartoons and all different kinds of things, not just comics, science fiction, fantasy, whatever it might be. And in the earliest days, even things like martial arts and yo-yo and music and whatever. So that used to be my answer. But I have to say, especially having gotten to know some of the people that were involved in this, I think the most surprising thing is that this was created by a group of young people who I really believe at this point, having traveled around the country, meeting with all of these people and doing events with them, and having gone through a lot with them and their families and that kind of thing through all this over the last 3 years. It's been a very interesting 3 years. And I've remained very close with almost everybody involved in the project. And I've felt very grateful of that. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to say what I said earlier about Greg Bear, for example. So as close as I got to everybody, you know, I felt like I needed to help to tell, you know, their story. And, you know, that's a lot of what I've been wanting to do with these continued kind of speaking engagements and things like that. You know, I don't know if that answers the question. Hello?
Yeah, no, I think that does.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I was just waiting for the
Okay.
comment in chat. Yeah, thanks.
Very good.
Any other questions from folks in the
I
audience?
saw something else pop up maybe, but maybe not.
Michael says no questions, great conversation, and thanks.
Yeah.
So where can we find you? What's next? Where can folks check out your work? Feel free to do some bigging yourself up.
Yeah, it's been a long ride. I will say again, if any of this interests you, obviously the book itself is something really worth checking out. I know it's a bit pricey, but trust me when I say it's well worth it. It's you know, up there price wise, but it's 500 pages. It's huge. It's all color, over 400 pictures and art. It's a lot of fun to read, very educational. I know a lot of people that are already starting to use it as part of classes that they teach and this kind of stuff as well. And it's the real story from the people themselves telling it. There's also, again, the opportunity to listen to Comic-Con Begins, the podcast series that this was originally based on. And like the book, it is an oral history. It's not me and other people talking about it. It's very much like an audio documentary. You just don't see the people being interviewed or seeing the clip. We have original music. It's like watching a movie, but it's all audio. So we had a lot of fun with that as well. Of course, my website is really where you can see all of my stuff, www.mathewklickstein.com. That's Matthew with 1 T. It really is spelled that way. Tomorrow, I don't know when this is going to be posted or whatnot, but tomorrow, Tuesday, I actually have another book coming out called The Little Encyclopedia of Jewish Culture. It's a small, kind of simple, lighthearted book. I was actually reached out to by the publisher about a little over a year ago that wanted me to write it for them. We agreed upon a price and I kind of put it together, and it was a lot of fun. I'm really proud of it. It's a very simple read. You know, just different kinds of folks from different pop culture and foodie worlds and different places that are connected to the Jewish community, something that I've written about a lot in the past, being Jewish myself. And it was really fun to get to talk about, you know, the Marx Brothers and George Burns. There's even a section on it on Jewish connections to the comics world, including characters that are Jewish that I didn't realize, like Thing from the Avengers, I'm sorry, Thing from the Fantastic Four, and Harley Quinn and a few others. So that was to do. But yeah, my website, www.mathewklickstein.com, is where you can see everything. I have I'm just now wrapping up this leg of the tour that I've been doing. We're going to be doing a few events probably in the early spring. That'll be on my website. I have a few already kind of coming together. And we'll see if I end up at Comic-Con this year or not. But it sounds like I'll be at Comic Fest at least, which is kind of a lighter version of it that was started by the people who created Comic-Con. And another part of the story is that did happen about a little over 10 years ago. The people who created Comic-Con, a couple of them, made a whole other little Comic-Con for the people who didn't want to have to deal with all the kind of bigger craziness of the con now. And it's becoming an interesting part of the story as well, and still goes on. So it sounds like that they'll be bringing me out for, but we'll see about Comic-Con itself.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we did have a one last question coming asking about your attendance, but that answers it.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. Any final questions? Looks like no. So I guess, please join me in applauding Mathew Klickstein. Thank you for joining us, Mathew. Thank you for this amazing work of oral history, for the work you do. building community and sustaining fandom. Like it's really, really awesome. So
Yeah.
props to you.
Happy to,
And
yeah, always happy to answer questions. And, I'll just say one last thing is that a big part of why I take all this so seriously is that I am concerned, especially working in the media world and having been a big part of the media world as I've been most of my life, as are a lot of my friends, seeing some of the breakdown that I'm sure we're all, very much aware of and having conversations about with misinformation and disinformation. And, just as there are people out there, some of them I know very well, who are doing that in the world of politics and things like that, I want to make sure that we have people doing that in our realm as well, pop culture. And I can tell you, going through working on this book or others that have done, there's no limited amount of misinformation out there about a lot of this stuff, because not a lot of people take it seriously or care. And some of us just feel that we need to have a resource like this. If you want to know what happened in the history of Star Wars and Star Trek and Twilight Zone and all those other things, it's in the book by the people who are very much close part of it or who literally did it, and that's something that I think is really important on a larger level as well. So I hope that people will see this as a larger resource, for term papers and for discussions in classes like this. And a lot of my work has had that happen, and I'm very proud of that. But that's a lot of why we do what we do. Especially because, as anyone knows who do the kind of work we do, it's certainly not for the money. So that would be nice one day. Yeah, so I just want to say, feel free to use this as a resource, and feel free to use me as a resource. I'm always available if people have just even a simple question. I sometimes pick up emails even from media outlet people. Hey, when did this happen? Or hey, can you say a quick word on this? And I'm always happy to do that, because I want to spread the actual real information that I know from the people I actually interviewed who were there.
Right. No, that's so appreciated. Thank you, Mathew. And thank you everyone for attending. And yeah, follow Mathew, follow the book, see you at San Diego, and see you at another event here at UCR soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, folks.